The deafening silence on Flight 2473 was broken only by the desperate gasps of a dying child. While flight attendants froze in panic, an ignored black woman in economy class pushed past first-class passengers who refused to move. Dr. Imani Carter, a single mother of two and emergency physician who'd been denied even a cup of tea throughout the 5-hour flight, performed an emergency tracheotomy using only a pen and a mini vodka bottle. The child breathed again. Instead of gratitude, what followed would threaten not just her medical license, but her freedom and custody of her own children. Would you stand by silently if you witnessed such blatant injustice, or would you speak up? Before we begin this shocking true story, let me know where you're watching from, and if you believe in justice for all regardless of skin color, hit that like and subscribe button to stay updated on more eye-opening stories that need to be told. Dr. Imani Carter was used to being overlooked. As an emergency physician with 12 years of experience and countless lives saved, she'd learned to swallow her pride when patients requested a real doctor upon seeing her dark skin. But today was supposed to be different. After saving for an entire year, she had splurged on a first-class ticket to the prestigious Hartman Medical Conference in Boston, where she was scheduled to present her groundbreaking research on emergency field procedures. Her 8-year-old twins Zora and Zamir had made her promise to bring back souvenirs, their excitement the only thing making the separation bearable. Next group, priority boarding, announced the gate attendant at Atlanta International. Imani stepped forward with her first-class ticket clearly displayed, only to have the attendant look right past her to the white businessman behind her. "Sir, you can go ahead." This happened 3 more times before Imani finally spoke up. "Excuse me, I have a priority boarding pass," she said calmly, extending her ticket. The gate attendant frowned slightly, examining her ticket with unusual scrutiny. "Oh, I didn't realize. You can go ahead." The tone made it clear what went unspoken. People like you don't usually fly first class. Once aboard Flight 2473, Imani located her seat. 3A, window seat, first row of first class. She'd splurged on this specific seat for the extra legroom, planning to review her presentation notes during the flight. As she began storing her carry-on in the overhead compartment, a flight attendant with a tight blonde bun and a name tag reading Melanie Whitfield approached. "Excuse me, ma'am, you're in the wrong section," Melanie stated loudly, drawing attention from other passengers still boarding. "Economy class is toward the back." Imani kept her voice level, though her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I have seat 3A." She offered her boarding pass. Melanie examined it with furrowed brows, then checked it again. "This must be a mistake. Let me double-check the system." "Is there a problem?" asked the white woman seated in 3B, looking annoyed at the delay. "No problem. Just confirming seating arrangements," Melanie replied with a customer service smile, completely absent from her interaction with Imani. After a third verification, Melanie reluctantly conceded with a tight, "Seems you are in the right seat," before walking away without the customary welcome aboard she'd offered to every other first-class passenger. As Imani settled in, she overheard the whispered conversation from the couple across the aisle. "Standards really are dropping these days. Probably using miles or some diversity program." She pretended not to hear, keeping her eyes fixed on her medical journal while her stomach knotted with familiar tension. The flight took off, and service began. Melanie and the other attendants offered hot towels, drinks, and meal options to every first-class passenger. Everyone except Imani. She watched as passengers on both sides received attentive service while attendants somehow always managed to overlook her seat during each service round. After 45 minutes, when the meal cart had completely bypassed her row, Imani pressed her call button. No response for 10 minutes. She pressed it again. Finally, a male flight attendant appeared. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat. "I haven't been offered any service yet," Imani explained. "Sorry about that," he replied without sounding sorry at all. "What would you like?" "Just water, please, and perhaps some tea later." 15 minutes passed before he returned with a plastic cup of water, no ice, no napkin, set down quickly before he hurried away. The tea never came. An hour later, Imani tried again with a different attendant who promised to check on that, but never returned. The internal debate raged. In her mind, Speak up more firmly and risk being labeled an angry black woman, or continue being invisible. As a single mother raising 2 black children, she constantly taught them to stand up for themselves while balancing the unfair reality that assertiveness from black people was often perceived as aggression. 3 hours into the 5-hour flight, after watching every other passenger receive multiple drink refills and snacks, Imani tried a 3rd time. This time, the cabin manager, a stern-faced woman named Whitney Prescott, appeared. "I understand you've been making multiple service requests," Whitney began, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard by nearby passengers. "I haven't received any service since boarding," Imani explained calmly. "I'd appreciate at least some water and perhaps tea if possible. We've been extremely busy, and I'm sure my staff has been attending to urgent needs first," Whitney replied, the implication hanging in the air that Imani's needs weren't urgent. "I'll see what I can do." When Whitney returned with a cup of coffee, she accidentally spilled it across Imani's lap, splashing onto the conference papers she'd been reviewing. The scalding liquid soaked through her pants. "Oh my, I'm so sorry," Whitney said, her voice theatrical while her eyes remained cold. She handed Imani a single cocktail napkin for the substantial spill. "I'd like an incident report form, please," Imani requested, her voice steady despite the burning sensation on her thighs. Whitney's expression hardened. "Are you threatening to report me? I should warn you that disruptive behavior on flights is taken very seriously. We have air marshals on board who don't appreciate passengers causing trouble." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Imani felt the eyes of other passengers on her, some curious, some disapproving, none supportive. In that moment, she realized she was completely alone at 37,000 feet, surrounded by people who had already decided what kind of person she was based solely on the color of her skin. 3 hours and 27 minutes into the flight, while still trying to salvage her coffee-stained presentation papers, Imani noticed something that triggered her physician's instinct. Across the aisle, a young boy around 9 years old with sandy brown hair had been fidgeting in his seat. At first, it seemed like typical child restlessness, but Imani's trained eye caught subtle signs others would miss. The boy kept touching his throat, his breathing pattern had changed, and there was a slight but increasing distress in his expression. His mother, a woman in her mid-30s with similar features, leaned over him with growing concern. "Josh, are you feeling okay? Does your throat hurt?" The boy nodded weakly, his face growing paler by the minute. The worried mother pressed her call button. Flight attendant Melanie arrived promptly, the same Melanie who had repeatedly ignored Imani's requests. "My son isn't feeling well," the mother explained. "His throat feels funny and he's having trouble breathing. He has allergies, but I gave him his regular medication before the flight." Melanie barely glanced at the boy. "It's probably just the cabin pressure. Try having him drink something cold. I'll bring some ice water." She walked away without further assessment. Imani observed Josh more carefully now. The slight wheezing had become more pronounced. His lips had taken on a subtle bluish tint, cyanosis, a clear danger sign. She recognized the progression of symptoms. This wasn't cabin pressure. This was anaphylaxis, a severe allergic reaction that could become fatal within minutes. When Melanie returned with water, Josh was visibly struggling to swallow. "I think he's getting worse," his mother said, fear rising in her voice. "He's allergic to peanuts, but I didn't see any served." "We did serve peanuts in economy about an hour ago," Melanie replied dismissively. "But you're in first class, so he couldn't have been exposed. Try the water and pressing this cold compress to his forehead." Imani could no longer stay silent. "Excuse me," she called to Melanie. "I'm a doctor. That child appears to be having an anaphylactic reaction. He needs immediate medical attention." Melanie gave Imani a cold stare. "We have the situation under control, ma'am. Please stay in your seat." "His symptoms are consistent with severe allergic reaction," Imani persisted. "Peanut particles can circulate through the cabin air. He needs epinephrine immediately." "Are you a medical professional?" Josh's mother asked hopefully. Before Imani could answer, Whitney, the cabin manager, appeared. "Ma'am, I've already asked you not to be disruptive. Please return to your seat." "I'm an emergency physician," Imani stated firmly. "That child is in anaphylactic shock and needs immediate intervention. We'll make an announcement for any doctors." On board if necessary, Whitney replied coldly. Within seconds, Josh's condition deteriorated dramatically. His wheezing became desperate, gasping as his throat swelled. His mother screamed, "He can't breathe, someone help him." Chaos erupted in the cabin. Passengers stood to see what was happening. Flight attendants rushed forward but stood helplessly, and Josh's lips turned a deeper shade of blue as his oxygen levels plummeted. "Is there a doctor on board?" Whitney finally announced over the PA system, her voice betraying panic. Imani stood immediately. "I'm a doctor. I need to get to that child now." She attempted to move toward Josh but found her path blocked by first-class passengers who had risen from their seats, creating a bottleneck in the narrow aisle. "Excuse me, I need to get through," she urged, but several passengers ignored her or moved with deliberate slowness. "Let me through. I'm a physician," came a confident male voice from behind. The crowd immediately parted for a tall, gray-haired, white man in an expensive suit. Dr. William Caldwell strode forward with the automatic authority granted to him by his appearance and gender, something Imani had been denied despite her identical qualifications. Caldwell reached Josh and began a cursory examination, while Imani tried to navigate the human barrier still partially blocking her. Whitney immediately deferred to Caldwell. "Doctor, what do you need?" "Get me the medical kit," he instructed, his voice commanding but his hands hesitant as he loosened Josh's collar. A basic but insufficient response to anaphylaxis. Imani finally pushed through. "He needs epinephrine. This is anaphylactic shock." Caldwell shot her an irritated glance. "I'm handling this. Are you really a physician?" "Emergency medicine, Boston General, 12 years experience," Imani stated, watching with growing alarm as Josh's desperate attempts to breathe became weaker. "Where's the medical kit? He needs epinephrine now." The medical kit finally arrived, but when opened, it showed signs of poor maintenance. The epinephrine auto-injector, required by FAA regulations, was missing. "We can't find the EpiPen," Melanie announced, panic evident in her voice. Josh's desperate gasps grew fainter. His mother sobbed uncontrollably. "What do we do?" Whitney asked Caldwell, completely ignoring Imani. Caldwell hesitated, clearly out of his depth. "Keep his airway open. We'll land as soon as possible." "He'll be dead before we land," Imani stated bluntly. "His airway is closing completely. He needs a cricothyrotomy." "That's extremely invasive," Caldwell objected. "We can't perform surgery on an aircraft." "It's that or watch him die," Imani replied, already assessing Josh's deteriorating condition. Josh suddenly went silent, his chest no longer rising and falling, his lips now deep blue. The ultimate crisis point had arrived. "He's not breathing," his mother screamed. In that moment, all eyes turned to Imani. The decision stretched before her like a dark chasm. Respect the barriers of bias that had confined her entire flight and let this child die, or force her way in and risk everything. Even if she saved him, she knew the system well enough to understand what happened to black professionals who operated outside the established order, especially women, especially in emergencies, especially when challenging white authority figures. Have you ever witnessed someone being ignored or dismissed because of their race, even when they had vital expertise to offer? Comment number 1. If you've seen qualified people of color disregarded in professional settings, hit that like button. If you believe expertise should matter more than appearance, and subscribe if you want to see justice prevail in stories like these. As Dr. Imani faced this life or death decision with a child's life hanging in the balance, what would you have done in her position? Would you risk everything for a stranger's child knowing the system might punish you for it? Time compressed to a singular point of decision as Josh's body went limp, his mother's screams piercing through the chaotic cabin. Imani's medical training kicked in with crystalline clarity. This wasn't about race, protocols, or permissions anymore. A child was dying. "Move," she commanded with such authority that even Whitney stepped aside. Imani knelt beside Josh, confirming what she already knew. Complete airway obstruction. No air movement. Seconds remaining before brain damage began. "I need a pen with a removable ink cartridge, alcohol, any small knife or blade, and something hollow like a straw," she directed to the stunned flight attendants. "Now!" While they scrambled, Imani positioned Josh's head, identified the cricothyroid membrane in his throat where she would need to create an emergency airway. Her fingers moved with practiced precision despite the turbulence and poor lighting. A passenger handed over a ballpoint pen. Another produced a mini vodka bottle from their bag. No one had a knife due to security restrictions, but Imani removed her own gold earring, a graduation gift with a post sharp enough to serve as an initial puncture tool. "What are you doing?" Caldwell demanded, his face contorted with indignation. "This is grossly inappropriate. You can't just stab a child's throat." "Either help me or step back," Imani replied without looking up, her focus absolute as she sterilized her hands and the earring post with alcohol. With the boy's mother's desperate consent, she began the procedure that she had previously only performed in controlled emergency rooms with proper equipment. Passengers gasped as Imani made the precise puncture into Josh's throat, creating a small opening with steady hands despite the high-stakes environment. Several recorded on their phones as she removed the ink cartridge from the pen, leaving a hollow tube, which she carefully inserted into the opening. The makeshift tracheotomy complete, she bent down and gently blew small puffs of air through the tube. For 3 excruciating seconds, nothing happened. Then Josh's chest rose slightly. His blue-tinged lips gradually began returning to their natural color as oxygen reached his bloodstream again. Within 30 seconds, his eyelids fluttered. The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause and relieved sobs from Josh's mother, who clutched Imani's arm. Thank you. You saved him." For that brief, shining moment, Imani experienced what white doctors routinely took for granted: unquestioned recognition of her expertise and gratitude for her skills. The color of her skin seemed temporarily forgotten in the miracle of the moment. Dr. Caldwell cleared his throat. "Well, that was precisely what I was about to suggest. A bit unorthodox in the execution, but the principle is sound. I was just about to perform the same procedure." The rapid revisionism in his statement was transparent to anyone paying attention, but many passengers nodded, already rewriting the narrative in their minds to place the white doctor back at the center of authority. Whitney approached with a clipboard. "We'll need statements about this incident. I'm not sure performing surgery was really necessary. We were only 40 minutes from an emergency landing." 40 minutes would have been 35 minutes too late, Imani responded, still monitoring Josh's breathing while instructing his mother on how to help keep the airway clear. Whispers began circulating through the cabin. "Was that really necessary? Seems excessive. So aggressive with that poor boy." The momentary respect Imani had earned began evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. The intercom crackled to life with the captain's voice. "This is your captain speaking. We've been informed of a medical situation that requires immediate attention. We're diverting to Pittsburgh International Airport for an emergency landing. Medical personnel will meet us at the gate. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately." The announcement should have reassured Imani. Emergency medical services would properly treat Josh, confirm her actions were appropriate, and the ordeal would end with professional validation. Instead, something in the captain's phrasing sent a chill through her. "We've been informed of a medical situation that requires immediate attention. Not, we have a medical emergency being handled by a physician on board." The subtle difference spoke volumes. Whitney leaned toward one of the other flight attendants, her voice just loud enough for Imani to overhear. "Radio the ground team about an unauthorized medical intervention. Make sure they understand the severity." As the plane began its descent, Imani realized that saving Josh's life might have been the easy part. The real battle was just beginning. The plane's wheels touched down at Pittsburgh International with the gentle bump of a skilled pilot's landing. But for Imani, it felt like plunging into hostile territory. As other passengers unbuckled and reached for overhead bins despite instructions to remain seated, Imani continued monitoring Josh, whose breathing remained stable through the makeshift airway. His mother, Karen Wilson, gripped Imani's hand with tearful gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," Karen whispered. "If you hadn't been here." "I'm just glad I could help," Imani replied, the professional satisfaction of a life saved momentarily overshadowing her growing unease. Throughout her career, she'd made countless split-second decisions that saved lives. This was no different. Surely once medical professionals on the ground confirmed Josh's condition, any procedural concerns would be irrelevant compared to the outcome. The cabin door opened, and paramedics rushed aboard with a stretcher and proper medical equipment. They moved efficiently toward Josh, quickly assessing the emergency airway Imani had created. "I'm Dr. Imani Carter, emergency physician," she introduced herself to the lead paramedic. "The patient experienced severe anaphylaxis with complete airway obstruction. I performed an emergency cricothyrotomy approximately 25 minutes ago. He's been stable since, with good color return and regular respiration." The paramedic nodded professionally, neither questioning her credentials nor her decision, as they transferred Josh to the stretcher. It was the straightforward medical handoff Imani had expected all along, but as the paramedics prepared to take Josh off the plane, Whitney stepped forward. "Before you go, we need to document exactly what happened here." She turned to another flight attendant. "Make sure we get statements from passengers in rows 2 through 5. Imani noticed Whitney was only collecting accounts from first-class passengers, most of whom had witnessed only the invasive procedure itself, not the critical moments of respiratory failure that had necessitated it, and certainly not the initial dismissal of Imani's attempts to help. As other passengers began deplaning, Imani gathered her belongings, expecting to follow. Whitney blocked her path. "The captain has requested that you remain on board until we've completed our incident report." "I have a connecting flight to Boston," Imani objected. "My medical conference starts tomorrow morning." "This is a serious matter that requires immediate attention," Whitney insisted. "The authorities will want to speak with you." "Authorities?" Imani asked, alarm rising. "I responded to a medical emergency as any physician would be expected to do under the Good Samaritan laws." Whitney's only response was a tight smile as she gestured for Imani to retake her seat. Through the windows, Imani could see Dr. Caldwell deplaning, nodding sagely to airport personnel as if he'd been the hero of the hour. He wasn't being detained. 20 minutes later, after all other passengers had deplaned, 2 airport police officers boarded. "Dr. Imani Carter?" one officer asked, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "Yes, that's me," Imani confirmed, rising from her seat. "Please come with us, ma'am. We need to ask you some questions about an incident that occurred on this flight." "I'm a physician. I performed an emergency procedure that saved a child's life," Imani explained, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the growing sense of injustice. "We'll need to see some identification and medical credentials," the second officer stated. When Imani produced her hospital ID and medical license from her wallet, the officers examined them with unusual scrutiny, as if expecting forgeries. To her horror, they then instructed her to place her hands behind her back. Cold metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists in full view of the cleaning crew now boarding the plane. The public humiliation was as calculated as it was unnecessary. "Is this really necessary?" Imani asked, struggling to maintain her composure. "I've committed no crime. We have reports of an unauthorized surgical procedure performed on a minor without proper verification of credentials," the first officer replied mechanically. "There are potential charges of practicing medicine without proper verification, assault with a sharp object, and child endangerment." "Child endangerment? I saved his life," Imani protested as they led her through the jet bridge. At the gate, passengers from her flight watched wide-eyed as she was paraded through the terminal in handcuffs. Some recorded on their phones, the same devices that had captured her life-saving intervention now documenting her public shame. Outside the security area, news had already spread on social media. A local news crew had somehow gotten wind of the incident, their cameras capturing Imani's humiliating escort through the terminal. The headline scrolling across the bottom of their live feed read, "Woman detained after unauthorized medical procedure on child during flight." Not doctor, not life-saving, just woman and unauthorized. Meanwhile, Imani noticed Karen Wilson speaking with airport officials, looking confused and increasingly distressed as Whitney stood nearby, gesturing emphatically. The narrative was being actively shaped, with Imani excluded from the conversation, about her own actions. At the airport police station, Imani was placed in an interrogation room, still handcuffed. "I need to make a phone call," she stated, thinking of her children who would be expecting her call upon landing in Boston. "And I need someone to contact Boston General Hospital to verify my credentials." "We're working to verify your identity," an officer replied non-committally. There have been cases of people impersonating medical professionals. Through the open door, Imani could see Dr. Caldwell speaking with airport officials, gesturing as if giving an expert opinion. Though she couldn't hear his words, his body language suggested he was critiquing her intervention. He was then allowed to leave, free to continue his journey while she remained detained. After 2 hours in the holding room, a detective finally entered with a file folder. "Dr. Carter, we've been able to verify your medical credentials," he began. "However, we still have serious concerns about the necessity and execution of the procedure you performed. Multiple witnesses have described it as aggressive, excessive, and frightening." "And what about the witnesses who saw the child stop breathing?" Imani countered. "Did anyone ask his mother if she thought the intervention was unnecessary?" The detective's expression revealed the answer before he spoke. "We're continuing to gather statements. In the meantime, the airline has indicated they may press charges for violating their medical emergency protocols, which require captain authorization before any invasive procedures." "Are these protocols more important than a child's life?" Imani asked quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the systematic machinery designed to protect institutions over individuals continued its inexorable grinding, with Imani caught in its gears. By the time Imani was finally released without formal charges, but with a stern warning about interfering in airline procedures, clips of the incident had already gone viral. The most widely shared video, shot from 3 rows back, showed only the most shocking moment: Imani puncturing Josh's throat with her earring, without context, without showing Josh's blue lips or stopped breathing, without Imani's repeated attempts to identify herself as a doctor. The video painted a disturbing picture. "Black woman stabs child's throat on flight" became the most common caption, spreading across platforms with the uncontrollable velocity that only the most sensational content achieves. Within hours, the video had amassed over 5 million views and countless inflammatory comments. Imani, exhausted from the ordeal and missed connections, checked into an airport hotel, finally able to call her sister Ayana, who was watching the twins. "Imani, what's happening? Your face is all over the internet." Ayana's voice trembled with concern. "It's not what it looks like," Imani began, before realizing how inadequate those words were against the tsunami of misinformation. "There was a medical emergency on the flight. I had to perform an emergency procedure." The comments are, "They're horrible, Imani. People are calling you a criminal, saying you should be in jail. Some are even making threats." Imani's phone buzzed with an incoming email as she spoke with her sister. It was from Dr. Robert Stevenson, CEO of Boston General Hospital. "Dr. Carter, we have become aware of a concerning incident involving one of our physicians on Atlantic Airways flight 2473. As per hospital policy, you are placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. Please do not report to the hospital or contact any patients until this matter is resolved." The professional foundation she had spent 12 years building was crumbling beneath her feet. No hearing, no opportunity to explain, just immediate presumption of impropriety based on a decontextualized viral video. Imani ended the call with her sister and opened her social media accounts, immediately wishing she hadn't. Thousands of notifications flooded in, many from strangers using language so vile it made her physically recoil. Medical experts who had never set foot in an emergency room criticized her technique. Armchair lawyers called for her license revocation and criminal charges. Racist comments questioned how someone like her became a doctor in the first place. But amid the deluge of hatred, small islands of support emerged. A Facebook group of minority healthcare professionals started a hashtag, Your Truth for Dr. Carter, questioning why a physician saving a life was being demonized. A few passengers from the flight posted statements confirming Josh had stopped breathing before Imani's intervention. One emergency room doctor created a detailed post explaining why Imani's actions followed established emergency protocols for complete airway obstruction. These supportive voices, however, were systematically drowned out by the algorithm-boosted outrage that generated more engagement and thus visibility. The most inflammatory takes rose to the top, while reasoned explanations languished in digital obscurity. A notification alert interrupted Imani's scrolling, a text from an unknown number. "We know where you live. Stay away from our children." Her blood ran cold as she realized someone had doxed her, publishing her home address and contact information online. With shaking hands, she called Ayana again. "You need to take the kids somewhere else tonight," she instructed her sister. "Don't tell me where, just go somewhere safe." The hotel room suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Imani drew the curtains tight and wedged a chair against the door handle, jumping at every sound in the hallway. Sleep was impossible as her phone continued buzzing with notifications and emails. Colleagues distancing themselves, conference organizers rescinding her speaking invitation, friends sending messages of concern but clearly unsure what to believe. At 3:17 a.m., a notification from an unfamiliar news site caught her attention. Passenger video reveals truth about Flight 2473 medical emergency. Unlike the other viral clips, this video showed the critical moments before Imani's intervention. Josh's desperate gasping, his mother's panic, Whitney and Dr. Caldwell's ineffective responses, and finally, the moment when Josh stopped breathing entirely. The footage had been uploaded by a passenger seated directly across from Josh, providing the crucial context missing from other videos. The article included a statement from an anonymous flight attendant, confirming that Imani had repeatedly identified herself as a doctor but was ignored. For the first time since the nightmare began, a glimmer of truth penetrated the wall of misinformation. By morning, the counter-narrative had gained some traction. Medical professionals, particularly those from minority backgrounds, began speaking out about similar experiences of having their credentials questioned. The hashtag Truth for Dr. Carter competed with a Fire Dr. Carter, creating a digital battleground where Imani's professional life hung in the balance. Major news networks picked up the story, though their coverage maintained a deliberately neutral framing that actually reinforced harmful assumptions. Controversial emergency procedure divides medical community, and questions raised about in-flight medical protocol after doctor performs throat surgery. None mentioned what should have been the headline, "Doctor saves child's life when others failed to act." After sleepless hours refreshing her feeds and watching the public debate about her actions swing wildly between condemnation and support, Imani finally saw a statement from Boston General Hospital appear on their official channels. Her heart sank as she read CEO Robert Stevenson's carefully crafted words. "Boston General Hospital is aware of the incident involving one of our staff physicians on Atlantic Airways Flight 2473. While we understand medical emergencies require quick thinking, we are deeply concerned about reports of an unauthorized invasive procedure performed outside hospital protocols. We take patient safety extremely seriously and are reviewing Dr. Carter's employment status while we conduct a thorough investigation into this matter." Not a word about the life saved. Not a mention of Imani's spotless record or her department-leading patient satisfaction scores. Just institutional self-protection at her expense. Imani stared at her phone, feeling the walls closing in. The system she had trusted, had dedicated her life to, was abandoning her at the first sign of controversy. The carefully constructed, professional identity she had built over years of sacrifice and excellence was being shredded in real time, pixel by pixel, tweet by tweet, statement by official statement. Have you ever noticed how quickly people jump to conclusions based on incomplete information on social media? Comment number 1, if you've seen how viral videos can destroy someone's reputation without showing the full context. Hit like if you believe we should wait for all the facts before judging others, and subscribe if you want to follow stories that expose how bias affects our perceptions of events. As Dr. Imani watched her reputation being dismantled online, how would you feel if your entire career was threatened for doing exactly what you were trained to do? What would you do if saving a life made you a target instead of a hero? Imani had just finished a strained video call with the twins, carefully masking her distress with a reassuring smile, when her phone rang with her lawyer's number. "Imani, "I've just been served with papers I think you need to know about immediately," said Elaine Mendoza, the attorney who had handled Imani's divorce 3 years earlier. "Marcus has filed an emergency motion for temporary full custody of the twins." The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus Devereaux, her ex-husband who had moved to California with his new wife shortly after their divorce, who had missed half his scheduled visits and was perpetually between jobs when child support payments came due, was now using this crisis to take her children. "On what grounds?" Imani managed to ask, though she already knew the answer. "He's citing dangerous and erratic behavior endangering the welfare of minors based on the flight incident. He's included printouts of social media coverage and the hospital's statement placing you on leave. The filing suggests your actions demonstrate poor judgment that poses a risk to Zora and Zamir." "That's absurd," Imani whispered, her voice failing her. "I saved a child's life using medical training that I've spent my entire adult life perfecting. How does that translate to endangering my own children?" "It doesn't," Elaine agreed grimly. "But he's filed in family court, where the standard is best interest of the child, not criminal or even civil liability standards. And he's requested an expedited hearing." "When?" "Tomorrow morning, Judge Patricia Hamilton's court." Imani's heart sank further. Judge Hamilton was notorious among family lawyers for her old-school views on parenting, particularly her belief that children of divorce fared better with stable arrangements, which in practice often meant traditional family structures with mothers who weren't too career-focused. "I'll be there," Imani said, immediately beginning to calculate how to get from Pittsburgh back to Atlanta in time. Her original return flight wasn't for 3 more days. After the conference, she would now miss entirely. "There's more," Elaine continued reluctantly. "The motion includes a request for supervised visitation only until the custody trial. If granted, you'd only see the kids with a court-appointed supervisor present." The injustice burned like acid. Marcus, who had once left 7-year-old Zamir alone in their apartment while he went to a sports bar, was questioning her parental fitness. Marcus, who couldn't name their children's teachers or doctors, was positioning himself as the responsible parent. And the system was taking his claims seriously enough to grant an emergency hearing. Booking the last seat on an overpriced flight back to Atlanta depleted the remainder of Imani's conference budget. She arrived home just after midnight, dropping her bags at the front door and heading straight to the twins' rooms, needing to see them even if just while they slept. Their beds were empty. Ayana had taken them to her apartment as instructed, a necessary precaution that now felt like a painful preview of what might come. The next morning, dressed in her most conservative suit with not a hair out of place, Imani sat beside Elaine in Judge Hamilton's courtroom. Marcus sat across the aisle, looking uncomfortable in a borrowed tie, his lawyer, provided by his new father-in-law, shuffling important-looking papers for effect. Judge Hamilton entered, her sharp eyes quickly assessing the parties before her. "This is an emergency hearing on case number 2024, FC 3892, Devereaux versus Carter, regarding temporary custody modification," she began. "I've reviewed the filings. Mr. Devereaux alleges that recent events demonstrate serious concerns about Dr. Carter's judgment and temperament that warrant immediate custody modification. Is that correct, counsel?" Marcus's lawyer stood. "Yes, Your Honor. As our filing details, Dr. Carter recently performed an unauthorized and dangerous surgical procedure on a minor child without parental consent, resulting in her suspension from medical practice and possible criminal charges. This reckless behavior demonstrates a concerning lack of judgment that directly impacts her ability to provide a safe environment for the minor children." Every word was a calculated distortion. There had been parental consent. There were no criminal charges. Her leave was administrative, not disciplinary. But in the hermetically sealed environment of family court, narratives could be reshaped with frightening ease. Elaine countered effectively, highlighting Imani's impeccable record as both physician and mother. But Judge Hamilton's expression remained skeptical, particularly when Marcus's lawyer emphasized the ongoing controversy and public nature of the incident. "Dr. Carter," Judge Hamilton addressed her directly, "while I understand emergency medical situations require quick thinking, I'm troubled by what appears to be a pattern of decision-making that prioritizes your professional judgment over established Protocols and authority structures. Wouldn't you agree that children need parents who respect boundaries and work within established systems? The loaded question revealed the judge's leaning. Any answer would sound defensive. Your Honor, as both a physician and a mother, I believe in following protocols. But when a child's life is at stake and those protocols are failing, my duty is clear. I would make the same choice for any child, including my own. Judge Hamilton's lips tightened. That's precisely what concerns me, Doctor. Parents must sometimes subordinate their judgment to established authorities for the greater good. Children need stability and predictability, not heroics. By the hearing's end, Imani had avoided the worst outcome, full temporary custody, to Marcus, but suffered a devastating compromise, joint temporary custody with supervised visitation for her during the 2 weeks before the full hearing. Her children, who had never known anything but her loving and capable care, would now meet with her under the watchful eye of a stranger, evaluating her every word and interaction. When school let out that afternoon, Imani waited with the court-appointed supervisor, a severe woman named Ms. Gladwell who carried a clipboard and spoke to Imani as if she were a potentially dangerous patient. The twins ran toward her with their usual enthusiasm, but pulled up short when they saw the unfamiliar woman beside their mother. "Mommy, what's wrong? Why is that lady watching us?" Zora asked, her perceptive eyes darting between them. How could Imani explain court orders and custody battles to 8-year-olds? How could she tell them that saving a child's life had somehow made her less qualified to raise her own children? "She's just here to help us today," Imani managed, pulling them both into a hug that felt painfully scrutinized. Later that evening, after the supervised visit ended and the children left with Ayana, who had been granted temporary caregiver status, Imani finally allowed herself the breakdown she'd been suppressing. Alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the artwork and school projects of the children who were her entire world, she sobbed until no more tears would come. Her phone chimed with a notification, a message from an unknown number showing a school calendar screenshot, "Just so you know what your kids are up to while you're busy playing hero." The message revealed not just that someone was monitoring her children, but that they had access to the private parent portal of their elementary school. Before she could process this new violation, a knock at the door jolted her back to alertness. Through the peephole, she saw a woman with a government ID badge. Opening the door cautiously, Imani was presented with another official document. "Dr. Carter, I'm from Child Protective Services. We've received an anonymous complaint about conditions in your home. I'm here to conduct a routine inspection." Anonymous complaint. Routine inspection. The calculated neutrality of the language couldn't mask the reality. Another system being weaponized against her, another barrier erected between her and her children, another front opening in a war she never chose to fight. As the CPS worker entered with clipboard in hand, Imani realized that the medical emergency on Flight 2473 had been just the beginning. The real emergency was now unfolding in every aspect of her life, with no clear protocol for survival. The Boston General Hospital executive boardroom had been designed to intimidate. Dark wood paneling, portraits of stern-faced former chiefs of medicine, and a massive table that positioned the hospital's medical review board at one end like judges on a bench. Imani sat alone at the other end, acutely aware of the physical distance that emphasized her isolation. The board consisted of 7 voting members, only one of whom, Dr. Elaine Washington, was a person of color. The others were predominantly older white men, with 2 white women whom Imani recognized as department heads. Dr. Robert Stevenson presided, though he would only vote in case of a tie. "This emergency session of the Medical Review Board is now in session," Stevenson began formally. "We're here to evaluate the actions of Dr. Imani Carter during an incident on Atlantic Airways Flight 2473 and determine whether those actions warrant suspension or revocation of hospital privileges and recommendation for state medical board review." The stakes couldn't have been higher. Loss of hospital privileges would effectively end her career at Boston General. A negative recommendation to the state board could result in license suspension or revocation, making her unemployable as a physician anywhere. "Dr. Carter, do you have representation present?" Stevenson asked, as if he didn't know she was alone. "I was informed yesterday evening about this morning's hearing," Imani responded evenly. "My attorney couldn't arrange to be here on such short notice." The scheduling was no accident, she knew. Emergency sessions typically allowed 72 hours. Notice, not 16. "We can reschedule if you prefer," Stevenson offered with a thin veneer of accommodation that didn't reach his eyes. "And remain on administrative leave without pay for how long?" Imani challenged. "That would be at the board's discretion," he replied smoothly. "Shall we proceed then?" The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Delay meant continuing financial strain while her reputation remained in limbo. Proceeding meant facing the board without proper preparation or representation. Either way, the power imbalance was insurmountable. "Let's proceed," Imani decided. If they were determined to remove her, better to face it directly. The next 2 hours consisted of methodical dissection of her actions aboard Flight 2473. Dr. Lawrence Whitaker, Chief of Surgery, questioned her decision to use non-standard equipment. Dr. Mary Sullivan, Head of Risk Management, emphasized the liability implications of performing a cricothyrotomy outside a hospital setting. Dr. James Morrison, Chief of Emergency Medicine and theoretically her strongest potential ally, instead focused on protocol violations and chain of command concerns. "Dr. Carter, would you walk us through your decision-making process when you determined an emergency airway was necessary?" Dr. Washington finally asked, the first question that actually addressed the medical reality rather than administrative concerns. Imani described Josh's progressive symptoms, the absent emergency equipment, and the moment breathing stopped. All factors that made the procedure not just justified but necessary. She explained each step of the improvised technique, highlighting how she'd maintained sterile field principles despite limited resources. "And you're certain the child would have died without intervention?" Dr. Washington pressed. "Without question," Imani stated firmly. "Anaphylactic shock with complete airway obstruction is fatal within minutes without intervention. The child had already entered respiratory arrest." Yet Dr. Caldwell, who was also present, has provided a statement indicating he believed the situation could have been managed less invasively, Dr. Morrison countered, referencing a document Imani hadn't been permitted to see. "Dr. Caldwell's initial approach failed to address the rapidly progressing airway closure," Imani responded. "By the time I intervened, the patient had no air movement at all." "That's your assessment," Morrison replied dismissively. "We only have your word for that." The pattern continued, her professional judgment questioned, her observations treated as subjective opinions rather than medical facts, her expertise implicitly diminished. Meanwhile, the testimony of white Dr. Caldwell, who by all objective measures had failed to provide effective care, was treated as authoritative. Hours into the hearing, Dr. Sullivan produced another surprise, a statement from Karen Wilson, Josh's mother, expressing concerns about the aggressive approach Imani had taken. Mrs. Wilson agreed to the procedure in the moment. Dr. Sullivan read from the statement, but states she was too panicked to properly consent and might have chosen a less invasive option if one had been clearly presented. Imani's heart sank. The airline's legal team had clearly reached Karen, likely suggesting potential liability if she supported Imani's actions. "We also have flight records," Dr. Whitaker added, indicating the plane was only 37 minutes from emergency, landing when you performed the cricothyrotomy. "Those records must be incorrect," Imani objected. "The captain announced 40 minutes after I had already started the procedure, and that announcement came well after the child had stopped breathing." "Are you suggesting the airline falsified records?" Stevenson interjected, his tone making clear the dangerousness of that path. The walls were closing in. Every piece of evidence seemed curated to create a narrative of recklessness rather than heroism, of protocol violation rather than life-saving intervention. Even the timeline itself was being manipulated to undermine her defense. When the board called for expert testimony, 3 senior physicians from other institutions appeared via video conference. 2 supported standard emergency protocols that would have technically justified Imani's actions, but carefully avoided directly endorsing her specific approach. The third, a white male emergency medicine specialist from Johns Hopkins, criticized her technique as unnecessarily invasive and suggested bag mask ventilation might have sufficed, a standard that ignored the reality of the failed airway and limited equipment. 6 hours into the hearing, without a break, Dr. Washington finally spoke up again. I'd like to note for the record that this board has reviewed 14 similar cases of physician intervention in public emergencies over the past 5 years. In none of those cases was an emergency hearing convened. In fact, in 11 cases, the physicians received commendations for their actions. She slid a folder across the table toward Stevenson. I've taken the liberty of compiling those cases. You'll note that all 11 commended physicians were white, and 9 were male. The 3 cases that received any review at all involved physicians of color. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Are you suggesting bias in our review? Process, Dr. Washington, Stevenson asked stiffly. I'm not suggesting anything, she replied coolly. I'm stating facts supported by this hospital's own records. The tension in the room had shifted. For the first time, the underlying dynamics had been named aloud, forcing at least momentary acknowledgement of the double standard at work. In the interest of thoroughness, Dr. Washington continued, I move that we request the complete flight recordings, including all announcements and communication between crew members, rather than relying on the airline's summary timeline. I second that motion, said Dr. Catherine Reed, who had remained mostly silent until now. The motion passed narrowly, but Imani harbored few illusions about the airline's willingness to provide unedited recordings that might contradict their narrative. As the marathon session finally wound down, Stevenson announced the board's decision. We remain deadlocked on final determination. Dr. Carter will continue on administrative leave with half pay pending full resolution. Additionally, the board requires a complete reenactment of the incident using simulation equipment to assess the necessity and execution of the procedure. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat either. The deadlock suggested at least some board members recognized the injustice at play. The simulation requirement, while burdensome, would allow Imani to demonstrate the medical validity of her actions under controlled conditions. As she gathered her materials to leave, Dr. Washington approached. This isn't over, she said quietly. And you're not alone. There are more of us than they realize. For the first time in days, Imani felt a flicker of hope. The system was flawed, biased and stacked against her, but not everyone within it was willing to be complicit in injustice. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its official appearance instantly distinguishable from the growing pile of bills on Imani's kitchen counter. The return address displayed the prestigious law firm of Harrington & Chase, representing Atlantic Airways. With a sense of foreboding, Imani opened it to find what she had feared since the incident. Atlantic Airways was suing her for $8 million in damages for intentional interference with business operations, defamation of company reputation, and violation of passenger safety protocols resulting in significant financial losses and brand damage. The lawsuit claimed her unnecessary and shocking medical intervention had created a media spectacle that severely damaged passenger confidence in Atlantic Airways safety standards, resulting in canceled bookings and diminished stock value. Imani sank into a kitchen chair, the magnitude of this new attack momentarily overwhelming her. She had already drained her savings fighting the custody battle and covering living expenses during her reduced pay administrative leave. Her health insurance was tied to her job, which hung by a thread, and now a multi-billion-dollar corporation was leveraging its virtually unlimited legal resources against her personally. Their strategy was transparently vindictive. They didn't expect to collect millions from an individual physician. The goal was to crush her completely, to make an example of her, to ensure no one else would dare challenge their authority or expose their failures. With shaking hands, she called the only attorney she could afford, her cousin Malcolm, who specialized in real estate law but had agreed to help pro bono. His usual confidence faltered when she explained the latest development. Imani, this is corporate warfare, he said quietly. Harrington & Chase has over 200 attorneys. They're known for overwhelming opponents with paperwork alone. The filing costs to respond properly would bankrupt most small law firms, let alone an individual. So I just surrender? Let them destroy me as a warning to others? The thought was intolerable. Let me reach out to some colleagues who specialize in this area, Malcolm offered. There might be interest in taking this pro bono if we can frame it as a civil rights issue. But the calls over the next few days yielded little hope. The few firms with resources to match Harrington and Chase were wary of challenging Atlantic Airways, a major corporate client for many large firms, or a potential future client for others. The civil rights organizations were already overextended, with cases involving more straightforward discrimination claims. When Imani finally secured a meeting with Elizabeth Chen, a partner at a mid-sized firm willing to consider her case, the assessment was blunt. They don't expect to win $8 million, Chen explained, examining the lawsuit. This is about forcing a settlement where you admit fault and issue a public apology, which they'll use to re-establish their narrative and insulate themselves from any potential countersuit. I won't apologize for saving a child's life, Imani stated. Firmly. That's admirable, Chen replied. But practically speaking, fighting this could cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees alone, not counting your time, emotional toll, and the risk of losing. When the discussion turned to Chen's retainer requirements, reality set in. Even with a substantial professional discount, the initial payment exceeded Imani's remaining financial resources. She left the office with Chen's sympathy, but not her representation. A week later, Imani sat across from Atlantic Airways' legal team in a preliminary deposition, accompanied only by Malcolm, whose real estate expertise left him outmatched against the airline's specialized litigators. The power imbalance was immediately apparent in everything from the lawyers' bespoke suits to the way they casually referenced previous cases they'd won against individual defendants. Dr. Carter, began lead attorney Victoria Harrington, a woman whose perfectly coiffed silver bob and designer suit radiated authority. We have statements from multiple flight attendants confirming you were offered standard beverage service multiple times during the flight, but declined. Would you like to revise your earlier assertions about discriminatory treatment? The ambush caught Imani off guard. That's categorically false. I repeatedly requested basic service and was ignored. Harrington slid a document across the table. These are signed statements from 3 flight attendants all confirming you were offered and declined service. Are you suggesting they're all lying under penalty of perjury? Before Imani could respond, another attorney interjected. We also have concerns about your claims regarding the child's condition. Medical experts we've consulted suggest the symptoms you describe would not progress to complete airway obstruction within the time frame you've claimed. The coordinated attack continued for hours, each of Imani's statements challenged, each assertion countered with expert opinions and witness testimonies she wasn't allowed to review fully. By late afternoon, Malcolm called for a break, looking overwhelmed. They're building a case that you exaggerated both the discrimination and the medical emergency, he whispered once they were alone. And they're suggesting you were seeking attention or planning to sue the airline from the beginning. When they returned, Victoria Harrington's tone shifted to one of manufactured reasonableness. Dr. Carter, Atlantic Airways is prepared to offer a settlement agreement. We would drop all financial claims in exchange for a public statement acknowledging that while you believed you were acting in the child's best interest, you recognize your actions violated airline safety protocols and unnecessarily escalated a manageable situation. You want me to admit I was wrong to save a child's life? Imani asked incredulously. We want to resolve this situation amicably, Harrington countered smoothly. The alternative is prolonged litigation that could take years and significant resources I understand you may not have at your disposal. The threat was thinly veiled: surrender or be destroyed through financial attrition. Malcolm suggested they consider the offer and respond within the week, standard procedure to buy thinking time. But as they gathered their materials to leave, the airline's legal team delivered one final blow. By the way, Harrington mentioned, with practiced casualness, we'll be filing discovery motions for your complete medical records, employment history, and educational background. Standard procedure in cases like this. My medical records? Imani questioned, alarmed at this new invasion. How is that relevant to whether I was discriminated against or provided necessary emergency care? We need to establish a complete psychological profile to understand your decision-making patterns and potential motivations, Harrington explained, as if requesting someone's most private information was perfectly reasonable. Judge Peterson has been very accommodating of broad discovery in similar cases. Outside in the parking garage, Imani finally voiced the question that had been building. How do they already know which judge will hear the case? Cases are supposed to be randomly assigned. Malcolm's expression was grim. In theory, yes. In practice, the biggest firms have ways of influencing judicial assignments, especially with corporate cases. I should have warned you. Judge Marshall Peterson has a reputation for favoring corporate interests. So the judge is practically pre-selected. They're demanding access to my entire personal history. They've coordinated witness statements that contradict reality, and they've somehow convinced the child's mother to turn against me, Imani summarized. The full weight of the systemic machinery aligned against her becoming clearer with each development. 2 days later, the other shoe dropped. Malcolm called with news that made the situation even more dire. Judge Peterson granted their discovery motion. They now have legal access to your complete medical and employment records, including performance reviews, patient complaints, and even your medical school applications. That's outrageous. How can my private medical information be relevant to this case? It shouldn't be, Malcolm agreed. But Peterson granted the broadest possible discovery. They're looking for anything they can use to discredit you. A therapy session where you expressed frustration with racial issues. A medication that could be spun as affecting judgment, any complaint from anyone ever. They're not just trying to win the case, they're trying to destroy your credibility completely. The reality of corporate power versus individual rights had never been clearer. Atlantic Airways wasn't just defending itself. It was sending a message to anyone who might challenge the systemic biases embedded in its operations. The message was unmistakable. We will use every resource, exploit every connection, leverage every advantage to crush dissent. Have you ever noticed how corporations use their massive resources to silence individuals who speak truth to power? Comment number 1. If you've seen how the legal system often works against ordinary people who stand up against discrimination, hit that like button if you believe justice shouldn't depend on the size of your bank account, and subscribe to follow stories that expose how powerful entities protect themselves at any cost. As Dr. Imani faced this overwhelming legal assault, what would you do if a giant corporation came after you simply for doing what was right? How far would you go to defend your truth when the entire system seems rigged against you? Imani stared at the stack of legal documents on her dining table, each page representing another brick in the wall being built to entomb her career and reputation. After another exhausting day of legal consultations that yielded no real hope, she'd returned home to find the twins' bedroom light on. Ayana had brought them for their court-mandated supervised visit tomorrow. She couldn't let them see her like this, defeated and hopeless. The doorbell rang. At nearly 10 p.m., it could only be bad news. Another legal notice, perhaps, or worse. Imani approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to see a young, Asian woman she didn't recognize, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Who is it?" Imani called without opening the door. "My name is Lily Chen. I'm a flight attendant with Atlantic Airways. Please, I need to speak with you." Imani's instinct was to refuse. This could easily be a setup, someone sent to elicit damaging statements. But something in the young woman's anxious demeanor suggested genuine distress. "What do you want?" Imani asked through the door. "I have information about what happened on Flight 2473. Information they don't want you to have." Imani opened the door slightly, Chain still engaged. "Are you recording this conversation?" "No," Lily replied, showing her empty hands and turning her pockets inside out. "I know how they operate. That's why I'm here." Against her better judgment, Imani let her in. Lily entered, still glancing back as if expecting to be followed. "I was the junior attendant on Flight 2473, she explained once inside. "Not serving first class, but I saw everything. What they're doing to you is wrong." Lily reached into her tote bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "I made copies before they could lose these. Internal memos showing Atlantic's passenger management protocols. They specifically flag certain passengers for enhanced monitoring, primarily passengers of color in first class. Imani opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were documents with Atlantic Airways letterhead detailing what amounted to a systematic profiling policy, thinly veiled as service quality assurance. One section specifically instructed crew to verify credentials and maintain heightened awareness when professionals of color claimed specialized expertise during in-flight situations. "There's more," Lily continued, pulling out her phone. "I recorded our pre-flight briefing for Flight 2473. Whitney specifically mentioned you." She played the audio. "We have a code yellow in 3A. Whitney's voice stated clearly. "Possible upgrade passenger. Standard protocol applies." Code yellow is their term for passengers they think don't belong in first class, Lily explained. "It's all implicit, never written down explicitly, but every crew member knows what it means." "Why are you doing this?" Imani asked, still wary despite the compelling evidence. "You could lose your job." Lily's expression hardened. "I've watched this happen too many times. Last year they did the same thing to my uncle on a flight to San Francisco, a respected cardiologist who was ignored when he tried to help during a medical emergency. When he filed a complaint, they buried him in legal threats until he gave up." She paused. "What they don't know is that I've been documenting everything for months. You're not the first, but I want you to be the last." The revelation of an ally within the system that had been working so relentlessly against her left Imani momentarily speechless. Hope, that most dangerous of emotions for someone being systematically crushed, flickered to life. "There are others," Lily continued. "Other flight attendants, ground crew, even some managers who are disgusted by what's happening but afraid to speak up. I've been in contact with a few who are willing to provide statements anonymously." Over the next hour, Lily shared more evidence, internal emails discussing how to handle Imani's case, communications with hospital administrators suggesting coordinated responses, and most damning of all, the unedited incident report from Flight 2473 showing that flight attendants had documented Imani's ignored service requests and repeated identification as a physician before they were instructed to file amended reports. "They'll know it was you who leaked this," Imani realized aloud. "They'll come after you too." Lily nodded, her determination evident despite her fear. "I know, but some things are worth the risk." The next morning, Imani met with Malcolm, sharing the explosive evidence. His eyes widened as he reviewed the documents. "This changes everything," he said. "With this, we can file a discrimination countersuit and force them to produce the complete unedited records they've been withholding." "What about Lily? She's risking everything. If she's willing to go on record, she'll be protected as a whistleblower," Malcolm explained. "Not perfectly, but it adds a layer of legal protection against retaliation." When they called Lily to discuss next steps, her voice trembled but held firm. "I already requested personal leave this morning. They're suspicious, but they can't prove anything yet. I'm prepared to testify if needed." Within days, news of Lily's whistleblowing spread through Atlantic Airways. 3 more employees came forward with supporting accounts of systematic discrimination. A baggage handler provided security footage showing Whitney in a heated discussion with Josh's mother immediately after landing, before Karen's statement changed. A gate agent shared records of the airline's history of similar incidents that had been settled quietly with NDAs. The tide of public opinion began to shift as well. The hashtag #IsStandWithDaughterCarter gained momentum, especially after medical professionals organized a virtual press conference highlighting similar experiences. Investigative journalists who had initially reported the story as a controversy now began examining Atlantic Airways' history of discrimination complaints. As pressure mounted, Atlantic's aggressive strategy showed its first cracks. Their legal team requested a temporary stay in proceedings to review new information, a transparent attempt to regroup in the face of mounting evidence against them. For the first time since the nightmare began, Imani allowed herself to believe that truth might actually prevail against the immense resources aligned against her. But she had underestimated the corporation's determination to protect itself at all costs. 1 week after providing her evidence, Lily received an unexpected, visit from Atlantic's HR director and their senior legal counsel. They came bearing an offer, a 7-figure settlement, full pension benefits, and glowing references in exchange for her signed statement that she had misinterpreted the airline's policies and her immediate irrevocable silence. Lily called Imani immediately after they left. "They're terrified," she reported. "They wouldn't offer this much if they weren't panicking about what would happen if all this becomes public record in court." "What are you going to do?" Imani asked, knowing she had no right to ask someone else to sacrifice their future. Lily's answer came without hesitation. "I'm going to do what I wish someone had done for my uncle. Some things are worth more than money." As Imani hung up the phone, she realized that in the midst of systems designed to isolate and overwhelm individuals who challenge the status quo, the most powerful resistance was solidarity. One voice could be silenced, but many voices together created a chorus too loud to ignore. Josh Wilson sat in a wheelchair in the corridor of Pittsburgh Children's Hospital, his mother Karen nervously adjusting his shirt collar to hide the healing incision on his throat. The boy's face lit up when he spotted Imani approaching. Recognition, immediate despite having been unconscious during their first encounter. "Are you the doctor who saved me?" he asked, his voice slightly raspy but strong. Imani knelt to his eye level. "I am." "How are you feeling, Josh?" "My throat hurts sometimes, but Dr. Sanderson says I'm super brave." He pointed proudly to the small bandage. "He says without you, I would have died." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "That's what they all say. Every doctor who's examined him has said the same thing. He wouldn't have made it to landing." Her voice broke. "They told me you performed the procedure perfectly despite having nothing to work with. They said most doctors couldn't have done it so well even in a hospital." This vindication from medical professionals who had actually examined Josh contrasted sharply with the airline's experts who had never seen the boy, but confidently declared Imani's intervention unnecessary. "I need to apologize," Karen continued, visibly struggling. "When we landed, that flight attendant, Whitney, she told me your procedure was dangerous and excessive, that I should protect myself legally by distancing from you. The airline lawyers said the same thing when they contacted me." She wiped her eyes. "I was confused and scared, and I let them manipulate me into making that statement." Imani had requested this meeting not for vindication, but to check on Josh's recovery. She hadn't expected Karen's confession or the medical confirmation of her actions' necessity. The hospital staff said even their emergency department might not have saved him with how severe his reaction was, Karen added. "They said your quick thinking and skill were extraordinary." As they spoke, Imani noticed Karen's tense posture and frequent glances toward the corridor. "Is everything okay?" Karen lowered her voice. "Since I withdrew my statement against you and started speaking out about what really happened, I've gotten some backlash. Nothing like what you've experienced, but enough to get a taste of it. People online calling me a liar, questioning my parenting for letting you perform the procedure." The injustice of it struck Imani anew. Karen was now experiencing a fraction of the hostility directed at her, simply for telling the truth. "The worst part is realizing how easily I was manipulated," Karen admitted. "They caught me at my most vulnerable moment and used my fear to turn me against the person who saved my son." Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse bringing discharge papers, but before they parted, Karen made an unexpected offer. "I want to go public with the full story. Everything the airline did, how they pressured me, all of it. Josh's attending physician has agreed to provide his professional assessment of what would have happened without your intervention." That afternoon, 3 significant developments occurred in rapid succession. First, a previously silent passenger uploaded the complete unedited video of the incident to social media, showing the entire sequence from Josh's initial symptoms through Imani's ignored attempts to help, to the critical moment when breathing stopped, and finally, the successful emergency procedure. The uncut footage left no doubt about the necessity of Imani's actions. Second, Josh's attending physician at Pittsburgh Children's Hospital, Dr. Rajiv Patel, released a formal statement confirming that based on the documented progression of symptoms and physical examination, The emergency cricothyrotomy performed by Dr. Carter was not only justified but essential for patient survival. The procedure was executed with textbook precision despite severely limited resources, demonstrating exceptional skill and judgment. Third, and perhaps most powerfully, Karen and Josh Wilson appeared at an impromptu press conference organized by Malcolm. Josh, still in his wheelchair but alert and animated, spoke directly to the cameras. "The Black Doctor saved my life when nobody else could help me. I wish I could remember to thank her when it happened." The footage of Josh hugging Imani went viral within hours, generating a surge of support that temporarily overwhelmed the negative narratives that had dominated coverage. Medical professionals across the country began highlighting racial disparities in how credentials are questioned and expertise dismissed, using Imani's case as a prime example. Atlantic Airways' stock dropped 7% in a single trading day, as calls for boycotts gained traction. Institutional investors began questioning the company's leadership in handling what was becoming a significant liability. The airline's initial strategy of overwhelming Imani with legal force was backfiring spectacularly as public sentiment shifted. Their response came swiftly and from the highest level. Gerald Harrison, CEO of Atlantic Airways, appeared on a major business network to address the controversy directly. Rather than acknowledging wrongdoing or offering contrition, he doubled down. "While Atlantic Airways is sympathetic to the child's medical episode, we maintain that the situation was less dire than portrayed in selectively edited social media clips," Harrison stated with corporate smoothness. "Our internal review suggests standard emergency protocols would have been sufficient until landing. We question the necessity of such an invasive procedure and stand by our crew's professional handling of a complex situation." The statement was a masterclass in corporate deflection, expressing sympathy while undermining the reality of the emergency, acknowledging the incident while defending the airline's actions, and subtly questioning Imani's judgment while praising their own staff. But unlike the early days of the ordeal, when such corporate positioning would have been accepted unchallenged, this statement met immediate and fierce pushback. Medical professionals flooded social media with explanations of why Harrison's assessment was dangerously wrong. Journalists who had examined the complete footage pointed out the factual inaccuracies in his characterization. And perhaps most damagingly, Karen Wilson issued a direct response. "Mr. Harrison is calling both me and every doctor who has examined my son a liar. Josh would have died without Dr. Carter's intervention. That is a medical fact, not a matter of opinion." As public sentiment continued shifting in Imani's favor, she received a call from Malcolm that initially seemed like good news. "The airline wants to meet," he reported. "Their tone has completely changed. I think they're finally ready to back down." Imani felt a surge of hope. Could the nightmare finally be ending? Could truth and justice actually prevail against corporate power? What she didn't yet realize was that corporations rarely admit defeat. They simply change tactics when their initial strategy fails. The meeting would not bring the vindication she deserved, but a new and more insidious form of silencing. The conference room at Harrington and Chase exuded wealth and power from its mahogany table to the sweeping city views 30 floors above Atlanta. Imani sat with Malcolm, facing not just Atlantic Airways' legal team, but representatives from Boston, General Hospital, and the State Medical Board, a coordinated front that immediately set alarm bells ringing in her mind. Victoria Harrington opened with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dr. Carter, we appreciate your willingness to meet. All parties involved believe we've reached a point where continued litigation serves no one's interests." Robert Stevenson from Boston General nodded in agreement. "The hospital is prepared to lift your administrative leave immediately and restore your full privileges and salary." The medical board representative, Dr. William Foster, added, "And the board is ready to close its investigation with no action against your license." It sounded suspiciously like complete capitulation. Everything Imani had been fighting for offered freely. Malcolm seemed equally surprised by their suddenly conciliatory tone. "What exactly are you proposing?" Imani asked cautiously. Harrington slid a thick document across the table. "A comprehensive settlement agreement that resolves all outstanding issues between all parties." As Malcolm reviewed the document, his expression darkened. This includes a non-disclosure agreement covering the entire incident, all subsequent actions by all parties, and explicitly prohibits Dr. Carter from making any public statements about racial discrimination by any of the involved entities. Standard confidentiality provisions, Harrington replied smoothly. The airline drops all claims, the hospital restores your position, the medical board closes its investigation, and everyone moves forward without further public commentary. You want to bury what happened, Imani translated. You're not admitting wrongdoing. You're buying silence. We're offering a clean slate, Stevenson countered. Your career fully restored, your reputation intact within professional circles, and substantial compensation for your troubles. He emphasized the last point meaningfully. The settlement included a significant but not life-changing sum. The calculation was clear. It had become more expensive for them to fight than to settle, but they would not acknowledge the underlying issues of discrimination and corporate abuse of power. The system was offering to stop actively destroying her in exchange for her silence about how it had operated. I need time to consider this, Imani responded, knowing immediate rejection would only harden their positions. Outside, in the relative privacy of Malcolm's car, she voiced her frustration. They're not interested in justice. They just want to make the problem go away. That's how the system works, Malcolm replied grimly. They'll pay to avoid setting precedent, but they won't change the underlying structures. Before she could respond, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. The caller identified himself as Thomas Jenkins, an HR representative from Westfield Technologies, the company where Marcus, her ex-husband, had recently and unexpectedly been hired for a senior position despite his spotty employment history. Dr. Carter, I'm calling as a courtesy, Jenkins began awkwardly. I believe you should know that Westfield Technologies is a major corporate partner of Atlantic Airways. Our CEO sits on their board. I've recently been made aware of the connection between your current situation with the airline and our new hire Marcus Devereaux. The implication was clear without being stated directly. Marcus's sudden good fortune was directly connected to his custody case against her. If she continued fighting the airline, his new benefactors would ensure she lost her children. The coordinated pressure continued mounting. That evening, Dr. Foster from the medical board called to unofficially inform her that if the case proceeded, the board was considering new verification procedures for emergency interventions that would disproportionately impact physicians of color. Meanwhile, Boston General announced new protocols requiring proper channels for reporting workplace discrimination, effectively creating bureaucratic barriers to addressing bias. The message was clear: fighting individual instances of discrimination would become even harder if she didn't accept the settlement. When Imani met with Karen Wilson the next day to update her on developments, she learned that Atlantic had approached Karen with a private settlement offer significantly larger than Imani's, contingent on Karen withdrawing her public support and signing her own NDA. The strategy was as sophisticated as it was insidious. Instead of fighting on a single front, the system had mobilized multiple pressure points simultaneously. The airline leveraged its corporate connections to threaten Imani's custody case. The hospital and medical board used their regulatory power to suggest broader consequences beyond her individual case. Economic incentives were deployed to isolate her from key allies. Even political dimensions emerged when a local city council member who had initially expressed support for Imani suddenly went silent. Malcolm discovered the council member had received a substantial donation from a political action committee funded primarily by corporations including Atlantic Airways. The most painful pressure came from within her own community when Pastor Michaels, an influential black community leader, arranged a meeting to suggest Imani consider the settlement for the greater good. Sometimes we must make strategic compromises, he advised with well-meaning paternalism. The resources from this settlement could fund scholarships for minority medical students. Your personal vindication might come at the cost of broader progress. The suggestion that she should accept injustice for broader progress felt like the final betrayal. Even those who should have been her strongest allies were susceptible to the system's fundamental logic of compromise and accommodation. Alone in her kitchen that night, Imani found herself at the ultimate crossroads. The settlement offer would end her immediate crisis, She would keep her job, her license, possibly even her children. All it would cost was her voice, her ability to speak the truth about what had happened and why. Accepting meant surviving within the system. Rejecting meant potentially losing everything in a fight against institutions designed over centuries to protect themselves against individual challenges. As she contemplated this impossible choice, her phone lit up with a text from her attorney. The airline had made a final offer with a 24-hour deadline, full restoration of her position, withdrawal of all claims, a substantial financial settlement, and critically, a joint public statement describing the entire incident as a misunderstanding, where all parties acted in good faith. In exchange, she would sign the comprehensive NDA, drop any potential discrimination claims, and explicitly acknowledge that neither Atlantic Airways nor any other involved entity had engaged in racial discrimination. They weren't just asking for her silence. They were demanding her participation in rewriting history, erasing the very real discrimination she had experienced, and replacing it with a sanitized fiction of mutual misunderstanding. The deadline loomed as Imani faced the most consequential decision of her life: accept the fundamental injustice of the system in exchange for personal peace, or continue fighting at potentially devastating personal cost for a principle that the system itself was designed to suppress. As midnight approached, bringing the decision deadline ever closer, Imani received one final crushing blow. Malcolm called with news that their legal strategy had been compromised. "Imani, I don't know how to tell you this, but I've just discovered our lawyer has been secretly meeting with airline executives. He's been sharing our strategy with them all along." The betrayal was so fundamental it left her breathless. Even the legal system meant to provide advocacy had been corrupted by money and power. The machinery arrayed against one black woman, who had dared to save a life while being treated as less than human, was so comprehensive, so multifaceted, that it seemed truly insurmountable. With no legal representation she could trust, institutions aligned against her, economic warfare depleting her resources, and her children's custody hanging in the balance, Imani faced the darkest moment of her ordeal. The system wasn't just biased, it was deliberately designed to crush individuals who challenged its fundamental operations. The question was no longer whether she could win, but whether resistance itself, even in certain defeat, had meaning and value beyond the outcome. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta bustled with unusual activity for a civil hearing. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers seeking signal instead of sun. Inside, the gallery filled, beyond capacity, with observers standing against the walls. At the defendant's table sat Imani Carter, alone. No attorney flanked her, no legal pad spread before her. After discovering her lawyer's betrayal, she had made the extraordinary decision to represent herself rather than trust another potentially compromised advocate. The settlement deadline had come and gone, her silence unbought. Across the aisle, Atlantic Airways' legal team occupied their table with military precision. Victoria Harrington surrounded by 5 associates and 2 paralegals, their matching leather portfolios and coordinated navy suits projecting institutional power. Judge Marshall Peterson entered, his reputation for corporate favoritism preceding him. "Unusual circumstances today," he noted, surveying the crowded courtroom. "I understand the defendant is now representing herself. Ms. Carter, are you certain you wish to proceed without counsel?" "Dr. Carter," she corrected calmly. "And yes, Your Honor, I am prepared to proceed." The judge's slight frown telegraphed his disapproval of this departure from orderly process. "Very well. Ms. Harrington, you may begin with your motion." As Victoria Harrington rose to present the airline's motion to dismiss Imani's counterclaims, the courtroom doors opened. A group of individuals in white medical coats entered silently, filling the last remaining spaces along the back wall. Imani didn't turn, but she felt their presence like a physical force at her back. Harrington faltered momentarily before regaining her composure. "Your Honor, Atlantic Airways moves to dismiss the defendant's frivolous counterclaims of discrimination as unsubstantiated and procedurally deficient, particularly given her failure to exhaust administrative remedies before filing suit." The legal maneuvering was designed to eliminate Imani's discrimination claims before evidence could be presented, a common tactic to protect corporations from accountability. Judge Peterson nodded along, his expression suggesting receptiveness to the argument. When Harrington concluded, Peterson turned to Imani. "Dr. Carter, your response?" Imani rose, standing alone before the combined weight of corporate power and judicial authority. "Your Honor, before addressing the legal arguments, I wish to introduce into evidence documents that directly contradict counsel's assertions." She approached with a file folder containing Lily Chen's evidence, the internal memos outlining the airline's profiling policies, the pre-flight recording specifically targeting Imani, and the original unaltered incident reports. As Judge Peterson reviewed the documents, his expression shifted from dismissive to concerned. The evidence was too explicit, too damning to be easily dismissed even by a corporate-friendly judge. Before he could respond, the courtroom doors opened again. Lily Chen entered, escorted by a man Imani recognized as Daniel Rivera, a prominent civil rights attorney who had previously declined her case citing conflicts of interest. Rivera approached the bench. "Your Honor, I'm appearing on behalf of Lily Chen, who wishes to provide testimony relevant to these proceedings. Ms. Chen is prepared to publicly release all evidence in her possession regarding Atlantic Airways' discriminatory practices unless the court agrees to review it in its entirety." "This is highly irregular," Peterson objected. But the dynamics in the courtroom had shifted palpably. The media presence, the silent medical professionals lining the walls, and now Lily's public stance created a level of scrutiny that changed the calculation of how openly he could favor the corporation. As the judge considered Rivera's intervention, Imani's phone vibrated with breaking news alerts. Outside the legal proceedings, the public battle had reached critical mass. Atlantic Airways stock had plummeted another 12% as the boycott movement gained celebrity endorsements, and institutional investors began publicly questioning the company's handling of the controversy. "Your Honor," Harrington interjected urgently, "we request a brief recess to confer with our client." The 20-minute recess stretched to an hour as Atlantic's legal team engaged in visibly tense phone calls. When court reconvened, Gerald Harrison himself had arrived, huddling with his legal team as they passed documents back and forth with increasing urgency. Harrington approached the bench, her usual confidence diminished. "Your Honor, in light of new information, Atlantic Airways wishes to withdraw its claims against Dr. Carter and propose a settlement of her counterclaims." "And what settlement do you propose?" Peterson asked. "Full withdrawal of all claims, acknowledgement of service failures on Flight 2473, policy review regarding medical emergencies, and a confidential financial settlement." Imani rose immediately. "I reject any confidential settlement, Your Honor. The issues in this case extend beyond my individual situation to systemic discrimination that affects countless passengers and employees. Transparency is non-negotiable." The gallery erupted in murmurs of support as Harrison whispered urgently to Harrington, who then addressed the court again. "Atlantic Airways is willing to acknowledge service disparities and commit to policy reforms in a public statement." "Disparities is not the correct term," Imani countered firmly. "The evidence shows explicit discrimination based on race, and any resolution must acknowledge that reality specifically." The negotiation continued in real time before the packed courtroom, with each of Imani's refusals to accept euphemism or partial accountability met with increasing concessions from the airline. The power dynamic had inverted. A single individual now set terms for a multi-billion-dollar corporation because truth, finally exposed to sunlight, held more weight than their legal arsenal. Judge Peterson, reading the direction of public sentiment, and unwilling to be remembered as the judge who protected corporate discrimination, finally intervened. "It seems the evidence presented raises significant questions that would be in the public interest to explore fully in trial unless the parties can reach a comprehensive agreement that addresses the systemic issues Dr. Carter has raised." Core message was clear even to Atlantic. Settle on Imani's terms or face a public trial that would expose their practices completely. By day's end, the settlement included not just withdrawal of all claims and substantial damages, but critically, public acknowledgement of discriminatory practices, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, independent monitoring of service, equity, and no confidentiality provisions that would prevent Imani or others from discussing the discrimination they experienced. As Imani left the courthouse, she found the steps filled with supporters, medical professionals, flight attendants including Lily Chen, and at the center Karen and Josh Wilson. Josh ran forward, the scar on his throat now just a thin line, and hugged her tightly. "The airline people said you did something wrong," he said with a child's directness. "But you saved me." How can saving someone be wrong? The simplicity of his question cut through the complex legal, corporate, and social machinery that had nearly crushed Imani for doing exactly what she had trained her entire life to do: save lives regardless of circumstance. In the days that followed, the systems that had aligned against her retreated one by one. The medical board not only cleared her completely, but issued new guidelines affirming physicians' duty to intervene in emergencies regardless of location or available equipment. Boston General Hospital restored her position with a formal apology and back pay. Most significantly for Imani, the family court judge vacated the temporary custody arrangement after Marcus's sudden employment offer was exposed as corporate interference in the legal process. When his new position mysteriously disappeared following Atlantic's settlement, he withdrew his custody petition entirely. The victory extended beyond Imani's individual case. The Federal Department of Transportation announced an investigation into discriminatory practices across the airline industry. Medical associations developed new protocols for documenting credential challenges faced by minority physicians. Corporate lawyers began warning clients about the reputational and financial risks of fighting discrimination claims with overwhelming force. 1 year later, Imani boarded Flight 2473 again, the same route, the same airline, but in a company transformed by her refusal to accept injustice. The flight attendant who greeted her at the first-class cabin smiled with genuine welcome. "Dr. Carter, it's an honor to have you aboard. Can I bring you some tea after takeoff?" As Imani settled into her seat, she noticed a familiar face serving in economy class. Whitney, demoted but still employed, moved efficiently through the cabin, her expression souring momentarily upon recognizing Imani before professional training reasserted control. Some things had changed dramatically. Others, like Whitney's, fundamental attitudes remained the same beneath surface compliance with new policies. It was an honest reminder that progress was neither perfect nor complete. When the tea arrived, served with respectful precision, Imani reflected on the tremendous cost of her stand and the changes it had catalyzed. The system had not been completely dismantled. Such entrenched power never surrendered entirely, but it had been forced to acknowledge its failures and begin the long process of reform. For the countless people of color who would board planes, enter hospitals, approach authority figures, and navigate systems designed to discount them, the barriers remained but had been weakened. The machinery of systemic discrimination had been exposed not just in theory, but in documented practice, making it harder to operate unchallenged. As Flight 2473 reached cruising altitude, Imani gazed out the window at the patchwork landscape below, a fitting metaphor for American society itself, with its uneven progress and persistent disparities existing alongside genuine beauty and possibility. The work of transformation continued, flight by flight, case by case, individual by individual, each small victory building toward the larger change that justice demanded. And for today, that was enough. A cup of tea served with dignity, her children waiting safely at home, and the knowledge that she had not surrendered her truth when the entire system demanded her silence. This powerful narrative illustrates several profound truths about systemic racism in America. First, it reveals how discrimination operates on multiple levels simultaneously, from personal interactions to institutional practices to legal systems, designed to protect the powerful. Dr. Imani's experience shows how racial bias can transform even life-saving actions into grounds for punishment when performed by people of color. Second, the story highlights the tremendous courage required to stand against systemic injustice. When faced with overwhelming opposition from corporations, institutions, and even some community members, maintaining one's principles becomes an act of extraordinary bravery. Dr. Imani's refusal to accept injustice despite the devastating personal costs reminds us that individual resistance matters. Third, the narrative demonstrates the critical importance of allies and solidarity. Lily Chen's whistleblowing, the medical professionals' silent support in the courtroom, and Josh and Karen's testimony all show how collective action becomes essential when fighting entrenched systems. No one person alone can dismantle structural racism. Finally, the story offers a nuanced view of progress. The ending acknowledges that while significant changes occurred, the underlying attitudes and biases remained in many cases. This reflects the reality that transforming systems requires persistent, ongoing effort across generations. The victory wasn't complete dismantling of racism, but creating cracks in its foundation that allow for future progress. The journey from injustice to accountability reminds us that silence serves the powerful, while truth-telling, however costly, is essential for creating meaningful change. Has there been a moment in your life when you witnessed discrimination but weren't sure whether to speak up? What held you back? Comment below and share your experience. Your story might give someone else the courage to act next time. If Dr. Imani's determination to stand for truth despite overwhelming pressure resonated with you, hit that like button to show your support for those fighting similar battles today. And if you believe stories like these need to be told to create understanding and change, subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that reveal the realities many face daily. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through Dr. Imani's experience. Remember, small acts of courage and solidarity happen every day, and together they can transform our world. Until next time, may we all find the strength to stand for what's right, especially when it's difficult.